Marisol Rivera, determined to care for her ailing mother, lost her life savings while rescuing a millionaire from a car crash. But what happened next brought unexpected hope and change to her struggling neighborhood. Before we dive into the story, let's do what Sleepless in Seattle taught us. Share where you're listening from. Comment below. The morning sun catches the sugar crystals on Marisol Rivera's Dulces de Tamarindo, sending tiny rainbows dancing across her wooden display stand. She adjusts a jar of candied pecans, making sure the morning light hits it just right. The market around her pulses with life, vendors calling out prices in rapid-fire Spanish, children weaving between the stalls, and somewhere in the distance a radio plays Sabor a mí, soft enough that only snippets of the bolero drift through the air. An elderly woman pauses at Marisol's stand, her eyes lingering on the treats, but her hands staying firmly clasped around her worn purse. Marisol recognizes the look, the careful mental calculation of wants versus needs, of treats versus necessities. Without hesitation, she picks up a piece of crystallized ginger, wraps it in wax paper, and holds it out. "Para usted, Señora Martinez," Marisol says. "The ginger is good for digestion." The woman's weathered face creases with a smile as she accepts the candy. "Gracias, mija. You're too kind." Marisol watches her shuffle away, swallowing the familiar ache in her throat. That piece of candy could have been 50 cents toward her mother's surgery fund, but some things matter more than money. Her father taught her that back when their family had enough to share. Around her, the market breathes with the rhythm of 100 lives intersecting. Produce vendors arrange pyramids of tomatoes and avocados, their fruits bright against the faded paint of their stands. Women crowd around Elena's textile stall, running their fingers over embroidered rebozos while haggling over prices. The buildings surrounding the market square wear their age openly, paint peeling like old sunburns, concrete cracking at the corners, wooden trim weathered to soft gray. Children dart past Marisol's stand, shouting, "Corre! Corre!" as they chase each other through the maze of stalls. Their mothers call after them in Spanish, warnings to be careful mixed with endearments. A girl of about 7 stops to press her nose against Marisol's display case, leaving a small smudge on the glass. Her brother tugs her away before Marisol can offer them a sample. The afternoon heat settles over the market like a heavy blanket. Marisol wipes her forehead with the back of her hand and begins packing up her remaining inventory. Each jar and container goes into its assigned spot in her crates. Organization is crucial when working with sugar in this climate. The sun has barely begun its descent, but she needs to get home to check on her mother. Their apartment sits above a laundromat, 3 blocks from the market. The stairs creak under Marisol's weight as she climbs, balancing her crates against her hip. Inside, the air smells of mentholatum and chicken soup. Carmen Rivera reclines on their worn sofa, surrounded by a nest of blankets despite the heat. Medicine bottles crowd the side table like silent sentinels. "Mija," Carmen calls out as Marisol sets down her crates. "You're home early." It was slow today. Marisol crosses to kiss her mother's forehead, checking for fever with the motion. "How are you feeling? Better if you would rest more." Carmen catches Marisol's hand, her grip stronger than it looks. "You work too hard. I'll rest when your surgery is paid for." Marisol tries to keep her voice light, but Carmen's eyes sharpen. "Ay, siempre tan terca." Carmen shakes her head, but her lips curve up. "Just like your father. Remember how he used to say I was the stubborn one?" Marisol laughs despite herself. "He would spend hours arguing that you were more stubborn than him, never seeing the irony." The memory settles between them like a comfortable silence. Outside, a car horn blares, and someone shouts back in Spanish. The normal sounds of their neighborhood float through the thin walls. Children playing, radios competing for attention, the rhythmic thump of the laundromat's dryers below. Later, after Carmen has fallen asleep, Marisol sits at their small dining table. The wood is scarred from years of use, but she barely notices as she spreads out her notebook and the day's earnings. Her fingers move quickly, counting bills and coins before recording the total in neat columns. The numbers mock her. Another day of barely breaking even. She flips through the notebook's pages, tracing her finger down column after column of calculations. Each page holds a piece of her dream, sketches of a proper storefront with her name on it, lists of equipment she'll need, recipes she wants to try. In the margins, she's drawn little candy jars and written encouraging words to herself. The surgery fund takes up the most space, a growing tally that still falls far short of its goal. Her shoulders ache from standing all day, but Marisol ignores the pain. Pain is a luxury she can't afford, not when her mother needs the surgery so badly. She glances at the photo of her father on the wall, his smile frozen in happier times. Dame Forza, Papi, she whispers. Give me strength. Tomorrow is New Year's Eve. The market will be busy with people preparing for celebrations, looking for small luxuries to mark the occasion. Marisol touches the cross hanging at her throat, offering a silent prayer that the new year will bring better fortune. Her own celebration will be quiet. Some special candies for her mother, perhaps, and hope for the future. The morning brings a surge of energy to the market. Marisol arrives early, arranging her display with extra care. Elena Morales is already at her jewelry stand next door, silver bangles catching the light as she moves. Marisol, Elena calls out. You're here before the sun again. When do you sleep, muchacha? Sleep is for people who don't have bills to pay. Marisol arranges a tray of coconut candies, making sure each piece is perfectly aligned. Elena clicks her tongue. You work too hard. Here, I brought you café. She passes a paper cup over the space between their stands. Gracias. Marisol accepts the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. How's Anna? Growing too fast, she asks for your candies every day. Elena's eyes crinkle with amusement. Speaking of which, Marisol is already reaching for a piece of tamarind candy. Tell her it's because she got an A on her math test. Hey, you spoil her. Elena tucks the candy into her pocket. Will you join us for the celebration tonight? The whole market is planning something special. Before Marisol can answer, Don Pablo appears at her stand. The elderly man leans heavily on his cane, but his eyes are bright as he surveys her display. Ah, my daily joy has arrived. Give me the usual, Nina. Marisol fills a small bag with candied nuts, adding an extra handful. Para su nieta? She explains when he raises an eyebrow. You're too generous. Don Pablo hands over his money with careful dignity, but that's why we all love you. Around them, the market comes alive with preparations for the evening's celebration. Children string colorful papel picado between posts, the tissue paper decorations fluttering in the morning breeze. A group of women gather near Rosa's tamale stand, laughing as they fold corn husks and share gossip. The scent of masa and chiles mingles with the sweetness from Marisol's candies. Storm clouds gather on the horizon, but no one seems to notice. There's too much joy in the air, too much hope for the coming year. Marisol watches a young couple hang lights across their vegetable stand, their heads bent close together as they work. Despite everything, the poverty, the struggle, the endless work, their community finds ways to create beauty. At home, Marisol shares a simple lunch with Carmen. The rice and beans are left over from yesterday, but Carmen has added extra cilantro to brighten the flavor. They eat at the small table by the window, watching pigeons strut along the fire escape. Remember the New Year's parties your father used to throw? Carmen asks, pushing her food around her plate. He would save for months to buy fireworks, and you would yell at him for wasting money. Marisol smiles at the memory. But then you'd be the first one out there, oohing and ahing at the colors. Life was easier then. Carmen's voice goes soft with memory. Before the medical bills, before. Next year will be different, Mommy. Marisol reaches across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. I promise. The rest of their meal passes in comfortable silence. Outside, the clouds continue to gather, and the first drops of rain tap against the window pane. Marisol feels an inexplicable tightness in her chest as she watches the sky darken. Something about the storm feels ominous, but she pushes the thought away. She can't afford superstition any more than she can afford rest. That evening, Marisol writes in her journal while Carmen naps. The notebook is worn, its pages soft from frequent handling. She records the day's sales, her hopes for tomorrow's celebration, her fears about the mounting medical bills. The words flow easier on paper than they do in speech, allowing her to acknowledge the weight she carries. A crack of thunder makes her jump, sending a line of ink across the page. The storm is getting closer. Marisol moves to the window, watching lightning illuminate the gathering darkness. The first heavy drops of rain hit the glass, and that sense of unease returns, stronger now. She tries to shake it off, focusing instead on her plans for tomorrow. The New Year's celebration will bring more customers, more chances to add to her savings. But as the storm grows stronger, Marisol can't help feeling that change is coming, whether she's ready for it or not. The next day dawns gray and threatening. Marisol arrives at her stand earlier than usual, hoping to set up before the rain starts again. Other vendors hurry around her, securing tarps and moving delicate items under cover. The usual morning chatter is muted, replaced by worried glances at the sky. She's arranging her display when she overhears two vendors talking at the fruit stand behind her. Their voices carry over the sound of rattling tarps and distant thunder. "Did you hear? Alejandro Castillo is in town. That rich developer, what would he want here? Probably looking for more property to buy up. Men like that don't care about people like us. I heard he spends more on one dinner than we make in a month." Marisol pretends not to listen, but their words settle heavily in her stomach. She's heard of Alejandro Castillo. Everyone has. His name appears in newspapers, usually next to words like expansion and development that mean change is coming, and not always for the better. The morning crawls by under increasingly dark skies. Marisol recounts her money 3 times, each total more disappointing than the last. She's still so far from her goal, and now the weather threatens to wash away even her modest daily earnings. Thunder rolls overhead as she checks her notebook again. The pages are filled with careful calculations and hopeful projections, but the numbers refuse to add up to enough. Her mother's surgery seems further away with each passing day. Rain begins to fall in earnest, fat drops that send customers scurrying for shelter. Marisol rushes to cover her displays, but water already seeps into the corner of a cardboard box, threatening to ruin an entire batch of candies. Her hands shake as she ties down the tarp, the plastic snapping in the strengthening wind. Around her, the market deteriorates into chaos. The paper decorations for New Year's Eve dissolve in the rain, colors bleeding together before falling apart completely. Elena hurriedly packs away her jewelry, silver clinking as she works. The sound of the storm drowns out all conversation, leaving only the rush of water and the rumble of thunder. A sudden gust of wind tears at Marisol's tarp, sending a cascade of water onto her carefully arranged displays. She lunges to save what she can, but it's too late. Days of work dissolve before her eyes. The sight of her ruined candies brings tears of frustration to her eyes, but she blinks them back. She can't afford tears any more than she can afford failure. The storm grows stronger as Marisol salvages what she can. She clutches her money pouch close, the weight of her savings pressing against her ribs like a talisman. The walk home will be miserable, but she needs to check on her mother. Lightning splits the sky as she starts down the flooded street. The rain is relentless, soaking through her clothes despite her attempts to stay under awnings. Water runs in rivers down the gutters, carrying debris and broken dreams toward the storm drains. The sound comes first. The high-pitched whine of an engine pushing too hard, too fast for these conditions. Marisol turns toward the noise just as a black luxury car rounds the corner, its tires throwing up sheets of water. The driver seems oblivious to the danger, maintaining speed despite the slick roads. Time slows as Marisol watches the inevitable unfold. The car hits a deep puddle and hydroplanes, tires losing their grip on the wet pavement. Metal screams against metal as the vehicle spins, slamming sideways into a lamppost with enough force to snap the pole. Marisol stands frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Steam rises from the crumpled hood of the car, mixing with the rain to create an otherworldly fog. The scene feels unreal, like something from a movie rather than her quiet neighborhood. For a long moment, she doesn't move. The rational part of her mind screams to keep walking, to get home to her mother. She's already lost so much today, her inventory, her hopes for a profitable celebration, but something stronger than reason pulls her toward the wreck. The car is expensive, its leather interior visible through shattered windows. The driver slumps forward over the steering wheel, still and silent. Blood trickles down his temple, stark against his pale skin. Recognition hits Marisol like another crack of lightning. She knows this face from newspaper photographs, from snippets of conversation and whispered rumors. Alejandro Castillo, unconscious and bleeding, trapped in the twisted remains of his car. The smell of gasoline cuts through the rain-soaked air. Marisol's heart pounds faster as she realizes the danger. She needs to act quickly, but fear roots her feet to the flooded pavement. Her money pouch weighs heavy against her side, reminding her of everything she could lose by staying. But her father's voice echoes in her memory. Some things matter more than money, mija. With trembling hands, Marisol reaches for the car door. The metal is hot under her fingers despite the rain. She pulls hard, but the door is jammed. Smoke begins to curl from under the hood, mixing with the steam in an ominous cloud. Alejandro doesn't stir. Marisol braces herself and pulls again, throwing her whole weight against the door. It gives way suddenly, nearly sending her sprawling. Water pools around her feet as she leans into the car, reaching for Alejandro's unconscious form. He's heavier than she expected. Marisol strains to pull him from the wreckage, her muscles screaming in protest. The rain makes everything slippery, and she nearly loses her grip more than once. But somehow, step by agonizing step, she manages to drag him away from the car. They're barely clear when her foot catches on a piece of debris. Marisol stumbles, and in that moment of imbalance, she feels the strap of her money pouch snag and break. Horror floods her system as she watches the pouch fall, tumbling into the rushing water of the flooded street. No. The word tears from her throat, but it's too late. The current catches the pouch, sweeping away months of savings, her mother's hope for survival, in an instant. Marisol reaches desperately for it, but Alejandro's weight prevents her from letting go. Tears mix with rain on her face as she watches her savings disappear. Every piece of candy sold, every extra hour worked, every small sacrifice, all of it washed away in seconds. But she can't stop moving. The smell of gasoline grows stronger, and Alejandro still hasn't moved. With the last of her strength, Marisol pulls him to the relative shelter of a nearby doorway. Her voice is hoarse as she calls for help, barely audible over the storm. But somehow her neighbors hear. Doors open and people emerge despite the rain. Ayúdame! Marisol calls again, and this time hands appear to help. Together they lift Alejandro's unconscious form. Don Pablo's son-in-law takes charge, directing them toward Marisol's apartment. It's the closest, he argues, and moving Alejandro any further in this weather could be dangerous. Marisol can barely feel her arms as they carry him up the creaking stairs. Water drips from their clothes, leaving dark pools on each step. Carmen meets them at the door, her face pale but composed as she directs them to lay Alejandro on their faded couch. "I'll call for help," someone says, and Marisol nods numbly. The room spins around her as the adrenaline begins to fade. She sinks to the floor, her soaked clothes heavy against her skin. "Mija." Carmen's voice seems to come from very far away. "You're shaking." Marisol stares at her hands, watching them tremble. She should tell her mother about the money, about their savings washing away in the flood. But the words stick in her throat, replaced by a sob she refuses to let out. "You did a brave thing," Carmen says softly, wrapping a blanket around Marisol's shoulders. "Your father would be proud." The blanket smells of home, of Carmen's cooking and the lavender sachets she keeps in their closet. Marisol clutches it tighter, trying to ground herself in its familiar comfort. On the couch, Alejandro remains still, his expensive suit ruined by rain and mud. Their neighbors drift away as sirens approach in the distance. Soon it will be just Marisol and her mother, left alone with an unconscious millionaire and the weight of their lost hopes. The storm continues to rage outside, but in here, in this moment, there is only the sound of 3 people breathing, 2 awake, 1 unconscious, and the steady drip of water hitting worn floorboards. Marisol watches a drop fall from her hair to the floor, creating ripples in the small puddle forming beneath her. Each ring expands outward, like the consequences of her choice, spreading into an uncertain future. She saved a life today, but at what cost? And what changes will tomorrow bring? Thunder crashes overhead, making the windows rattle in their frames. The storm shows no signs of stopping, much like the tide of events Marisol has set in motion. She closes her eyes, exhaustion settling into her bones, and listens to the rain fall against their roof, a steady rhythm that sounds almost like coins dropping, one by one, into an endless sea. Rain hammers against the windows as Marisol struggles through her front door, Alejandro Castillo's unconscious form heavy against her shoulder. Water pools beneath their feet, darkening the worn floorboards. Her arms tremble from the effort of supporting him, muscles screaming after the ordeal of dragging him from the wreckage. Por Dios, Carmen whispers from her chair, her eyes wide at the sight of her daughter supporting a man in a ruined designer suit. Mija, what happened? Marisol guides Alejandro to their faded couch, her movements careful despite her exhaustion. His head lolls to one side, blood still trickling from the cut on his temple. There was an accident, she says, her voice cracking. His car. The storm. The words tangle in her throat as the reality of what she's lost crashes over her. Her savings, gone. Washed away in an instant like they meant nothing. Carmen leans forward in her chair, concern etching deeper lines around her eyes. You're soaked through. Who is he? Alejandro Castillo. Marisol wrings water from her hair, letting it splatter on the already wet floor. The developer everyone's been talking about. Her hands won't stop shaking. I couldn't leave him there, Mommy. The car was smoking, and I thought... She breaks off, remembering the acrid smell of gasoline mixing with rain. Of course you couldn't. Carmen's voice softens. Your father raised you better than that. She watches as Marisol gathers towels from their small linen closet, her movements sharp with suppressed emotion. What else happened? Something's wrong. Marisol presses her forehead against the cool wood of the closet door, fighting back tears. My money pouch, all our savings. The words feel like glass in her throat. It got caught when I was pulling him out. The floodwaters. She can't finish, but Carmen understands. Oh, Mija. Carmen reaches for Marisol's hand as she passes, her grip warm and steady. Listen to me. No amount of money is worth a human life. You did the right thing. Did I? Marisol yanks her hand away, anger finally breaking through. How are we supposed to pay for your surgery now? I've been saving for months, and in 1 second. She grabs the first aid kit from under the sink, the plastic container rattling in her trembling hands. What if he doesn't even remember? What if he wakes up and thinks I robbed him? Or... Marisol. Carmen's tone carries a familiar note of gentle reproach. Stop. You're tired and scared, but this isn't you. She watches as Marisol kneels beside the couch, dabbing at Alejandro's head wound with antiseptic. Good deeds don't always bring immediate rewards, but they matter. They shape who we are. Rain continues to pour outside as Marisol tends to Alejandro's injuries. His expensive watch catches the light as she works, probably worth more than she makes in months. The contrast between his tailored clothes and their modest apartment makes her chest tight. She imagines walking past the accident, pretending not to see. The thought sends shame coursing through her, hot and bitter. I know you're right, she says finally, her voice barely audible over the storm. But I was so close, Mommy. Another few months and we would have had enough. She secures a bandage over the cut on Alejandro's temple, her touch gentle despite her turmoil. Now I have to start over, and your condition. We'll find a way. Carmen adjusts her blanket, hiding a wince that Marisol catches anyway. We always do. Alejandro stirs slightly, mumbling something incomprehensible. Marisol tenses, but he doesn't wake. His breathing remains steady, face relaxed in unconsciousness. Will he remember her pulling him from the wreck? Or will he wake confused, suspicious of finding himself in a stranger's home? Through the night, Marisol keeps vigil. Carmen eventually dozes in her chair, but Marisol can't rest. She paces their small living room, jumping at every rumble of thunder. The storm rages on, as if determined to wash away every trace of stability in her life. Morning brings weak sunlight and the sound of Carmen in the kitchen, the familiar routine of breakfast preparation, a small comfort. Marisol's eyes burn from lack of sleep, but she forces herself to help, measuring coffee grounds with mechanical precision. He moved a little while ago, Carmen says, nodding toward the couch where Alejandro lies. I think he's starting to wake up. Marisol sets down the coffee scoop harder than necessary. Good. Maybe then we can... A sharp knock at the door cuts her off. 3 rapid strikes that make her heart jump. When she opens the door, she finds herself face to face with a woman whose tailored blazer probably costs more than their monthly rent. 2 police officers flank her, their expressions neutral but watchful. I'm Isabella Castillo, the woman announces, her voice clipped. I understand you have my father. Her eyes sweep past Marisol, taking in the modest apartment with poorly concealed disdain. And I'd like an explanation of exactly what happened to his wallet and phone. Marisol's stomach drops. She hadn't even thought to check for his belongings during the rescue. There was an accident. In the storm, I pulled him from the car before. A convenient story. Isabella steps forward, forcing Marisol to move back. Officers, please note that my father's Rolex is still present, but his other valuables are missing. Her gaze fixes on Marisol with laser intensity. Did you think leaving the watch would make you look less suspicious? Or was it too difficult to remove while he was unconscious? What? Marisol's voice comes out barely above a whisper. No, I would never. Ma'am, one of the officers interrupts, addressing Marisol. We need to ask you some questions about last night's events. His tone suggests he's already made up his mind about her guilt. This is ridiculous. Carmen's voice cuts through the tension. She wheels herself forward, her presence somehow filling the small room despite her seated position. My daughter saved your father's life. She lost everything helping him. Isabella's laugh is sharp and without humor. Lost everything? Please, from the looks of this place, there wasn't much to lose. She turns to the officers. I want her taken in for questioning, now. I'm telling the truth. Marisol's hands clench at her sides. Check the storm drain on Maple Street. That's where my savings went when I was dragging your father to safety. Her voice cracks. Everything I had, gone in an instant, but I couldn't let him die. A touching story. Isabella's tone drips with sarcasm. I'm sure you have witnesses, security camera footage, any evidence at all? The silence that follows feels like a noose tightening. Marisol looks at her mother, sees the helpless worry in her eyes, and something inside her crumples. No, she whispers. Just my word. That's what I thought. Isabella gestures to the officers. Take her in. I want a full statement on record. Mia, Carmen calls as they lead Marisol toward the door. Stay strong. The truth will come out. But Marisol isn't so sure anymore. The walk to the police car feels like a dream, each step taking her further from everything she knows to be true about herself. She glances back at their apartment window, catching one last glimpse of her mother's face before sliding into the back seat. At the station, they put her in a small room with flickering fluorescent lights. The metal chair is cold through her still damp clothes. Hours pass in a blur of repeated questions, each one designed to trip her up, to expose the lies they're convinced she's telling. Let's go through it again, an officer says, his patience wearing thin. You expect us to believe you just happened to be there when Mr. Castillo crashed? Marisol rubs her temples, exhaustion making it hard to focus. I was walking home from the market. My stand was ruined by the storm, and Convenient timing, he interrupts. And you didn't think to call emergency services? I told you, there wasn't time. The car was smoking, and I was afraid it would. She trails off, seeing the skepticism in his eyes. How can she make them understand the split-second decision, the choice between saving a life and protecting her own interests? Miss Rivera, another officer joins in, his tone falsely sympathetic. We see cases like this all the time. People in difficult financial situations, finding ways to take advantage. If you cooperate now. I didn't steal anything. The words burst from her with unexpected force. I lost everything I had trying to help him. Everything. Her voice breaks. Check my bank records. Talk to the people at the market. I've been saving for months for my mother's surgery, and now it's all gone because I couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. The officers exchange looks that make her stomach twist. They don't believe her. Why would they? She's just another poor woman in a neighborhood full of struggles. And Alejandro Castillo is, well, Alejandro Castillo. Back at her apartment, Carmen sits beside Alejandro's still form, watching for any sign of consciousness. He stirs occasionally, mumbling fragments of words, but full awareness remains elusive. Each minute that passes is another minute her daughter spends under suspicion, another crack in the reputation she spent years building. Please, Carmen whispers, though she's not sure if she's speaking to Alejandro or to God. Please remember what she did for you. The morning creeps toward afternoon. Isabella paces the small living room, her heels clicking against the worn floorboards. Her phone rings constantly. Lawyers, family members, probably reporters eager for a story about the wealthy developer found in a questionable part of town. He's waking up, Carmen announces suddenly, noticing Alejandro's eyes fluttering. Mr. Castillo, can you hear me? Alejandro's eyes open slowly, confusion evident in his expression. He tries to sit up but falls back with a groan. Where? You're safe, Carmen assures him, shooting a pointed look at Isabella. Do you remember what happened? The accident? Accident. Alejandro's brow furrows. The storm. Someone pulled me out. His hand moves to the bandage on his temple. A woman, she wouldn't leave me there, even when... Isabella steps forward. Father, your wallet and phone are missing. This woman claims she saved you, but... The money, Alejandro interrupts, his voice growing stronger. She lost something. I remember her crying out. He pushes himself up, despite Carmen's protests. Where is she? I need to thank her. She's at the police station, Carmen says quietly, being questioned about theft. Alejandro's face darkens. Get me there. Now. He swings his legs off the couch, wavering slightly. I remember everything. The crash, her pulling me out, she saved my life while her own savings washed away. He fixes Isabella with a stern look. Call them. Tell them to release her immediately. But father. Now, Isabella. His tone leaves no room for argument. I may not be fully recovered, but I know what happened. That woman is a hero, not a thief. The next hour passes in a blur of phone calls and activity. Alejandro insists on going to the station himself, despite his weakened condition. Carmen watches it all with quiet satisfaction, sending up a silent prayer of thanks. When Marisol finally walks through her door again, she looks smaller somehow, drained by the ordeal. But her eyes widen at the sight of Alejandro standing there, supported by Isabella. Miss Rivera, he says formally, then softens. Marisol, I remember what you did, what you lost because of me. He steps forward, wavering slightly. I can never fully repay such selflessness, but I promise you, things will be different now. Marisol sinks into a chair, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. I just did what anyone would do, she mumbles, but the words feel hollow even to her. No, Alejandro says firmly. You did what very few would do. You put someone else's life above your own interests. He glances at Isabella, who has the grace to look uncomfortable. Some of us could learn from such example. Isabella steps forward, her expression stiff but sincere. I apologize for my assumptions. I was wrong about you. But Marisol barely hears her. The neighbors are gathering outside their door, drawn by the commotion. She can hear their whispers, see the speculation in their eyes. Her reputation, her standing in the community, everything feels fragile now, changed by suspicion and misunderstanding. Alejandro seems to sense her distress. We'll make this right, he promises. All of it. But as Marisol looks around her small apartment, at her mother's worried face and the curious neighbors beyond their door, she wonders if anything will ever really be the same. The storm has passed, but its effects linger like shadows, reminding her that sometimes doing the right thing comes with a cost that can't be measured in dollars and cents. Thunder rumbles in the distance, another storm approaching, or perhaps just an echo of the one that changed everything. Marisol closes her eyes, feeling the weight of the past 24 hours pressing down on her. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new chances to rebuild what was lost. But for now, she simply sits in the quiet aftermath, letting the reality of everything that's happened wash over her like rain. The sound of her neighbors' whispers fades as they drift away, leaving behind a silence that feels heavy with unspoken judgments and shifting loyalties. Marisol opens her eyes to find her mother watching her with that particular mix of pride and worry that only mothers seem to master. Rest now, mija, Carmen says softly. Tomorrow is another day. And in those simple words, Marisol finds a small measure of peace. Tomorrow is indeed another day, a chance to begin again, to prove herself once more to a community that has been both her support and now her judge. The path ahead seems uncertain, but she straightens her shoulders, drawing on the same strength that helped her pull Alejandro from the wreckage. After all, she is her father's daughter, and if he taught her anything, it's that the measure of a person lies not in their circumstances, but in their choices. Even when those choices come at a cost she's only beginning to understand. Rain drums against the windows as Marisol climbs the creaking stairs to her apartment, each step heavy with exhaustion. Her clothes still carry the dampness from the storm, clinging to her skin like the weight of accusations that followed her home from the police station. The familiar scent of her mother's mentholatum and chicken soup wraps around her as she pushes open the door, but even these comforts feel distant now. Carmen sits in her usual spot by the window, wrapped in her crocheted blanket despite the lingering humidity. Her eyes find Marisol's immediately, sharp with concern. Mija. I'm fine, Mommy. The words taste stale on Marisol's tongue. She moves to the kitchen, desperate for something to do with her hands. The kettle scrapes against the stovetop as she fills it with water, the sound harsh in the heavy silence. A soft knock interrupts her movements. Elena stands in the doorway, a steaming bowl of caldo de pollo cradled in her hands. Behind her, Don Pablo leans on his cane, his weathered face creased with worry. You need to eat something, Elena says, her voice gentle. She sets the bowl on the small kitchen table, the rich aroma of chicken and cilantro filling the cramped space. Don Pablo clears his throat. What happened at the station? It wasn't right, Marisol. We all know the kind of person you are. The kindness in their voices makes her throat tight. Marisol nods, unable to speak. She wants to believe their words, but doubt gnaws at her edges. Were they here out of genuine care or obligation? Did they whisper about her when she wasn't around, wondering if Isabella's accusations held truth? After they leave, Marisol sits at the kitchen table, her financial notebook open before her. The pages blur as she stares at columns of careful calculations, each number representing a piece of candy sold, an extra hour worked, a small luxury denied. Without her savings, they feel meaningless, just ink on paper, dreams dissolved like sugar in rain. Across town, in a house that could fit Marisol's entire building in its grounds, Alejandro Castillo lies in his daughter's guest room. The silk sheets feel foreign against his skin, too smooth after the rough warmth of the blanket Marisol had draped over him. His head throbs where it struck the steering wheel, but it's not pain that keeps him awake. He sees her face in his mind, determination etched in every line as she pulled him from the wreckage. The memory comes in fragments, the taste of rain, the screech of metal, then Marisol's voice cutting through his confusion, urging him to move. Her small hands had been surprisingly strong, her resolve unwavering despite the danger. The contrast between her world and his own strikes him with sudden clarity. He remembers the worn sofa where they laid him, the patches in the ceiling, the careful way Carmen Rivera arranged her medicine bottles on the side table. Signs of poverty managed with dignity, of sacrifices made without complaint. For the first time in years, Alejandro feels the full weight of his privilege. How many times had he driven past neighborhoods like Marisol's, seeing only investment opportunities instead of lives being lived? How many families struggled while he attended charity galas, writing checks that barely dented his wealth? The realization settles in his chest like a stone. His brush with death has given him a second chance, and he owes it to more than just Marisol. He needs to see her again, to understand the world that shaped someone capable of such selfless courage. Night deepens outside Marisol's window as she opens her journal, the pages soft and familiar under her fingers. She hasn't written in weeks, too busy counting coins and planning inventories. Her pen hovers over the blank page before the words begin to flow. The market feels different now. Empty spaces where trust used to live. They look at me like I'm both hero and thief, savior and suspect. How do you measure the worth of doing right? In coins swept away by floodwater? In whispers that follow you home? Her writing slows as she reaches the heart of her turmoil. I keep seeing his face when I pulled him from the car. Alejandro Castillo, the man who could buy and sell our whole neighborhood without blinking. Was it worth it? Everything I saved, gone in an instant. But what choice did I have? Leave him there? Become the person they think I am? The pen presses harder into the paper. Papa always said character is what you do when no one's watching. But what about when everyone's watching, and they still get it wrong? She closes the journal with a single line. If I don't trust myself, who will? The words stare back at her, a small act of defiance against the doubt that threatens to consume her. Morning brings a knock that changes everything. Marisol opens the door to find Alejandro Castillo on her threshold, his tailored suit impossibly crisp despite the lingering humidity. Behind him, Isabella shifts uncomfortably, her designer heels seemingly out of place on the weathered landing. Señorita Rivera, Alejandro says, his voice warm but uncertain. May we come in? Marisol steps aside, hyper-aware of their eyes taking in her home. The peeling paint she's been meaning to fix, the water stain in the corner from last month's leak, the mismatched chairs around their small table. Pride and defiance war in her chest as she gestures for them to sit. Carmen emerges from her room, moving slowly but with dignity. Señor Castillo, welcome to our home. Alejandro's eyes linger on Carmen's frail form, noting the careful way she lowers herself into her chair. Something shifts in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the human cost behind statistics he's reviewed in boardrooms. I needed to thank you properly, he begins, his gaze returning to Marisol. What you did, most people would have walked away. Most people in my neighborhood wouldn't, Marisol says quietly. We look out for each other here. It's how we survive. The words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Alejandro glances around again, but this time he truly sees the well-worn but carefully maintained furniture, the small shrine to Marisol's father with its fresh flowers, the neat stack of medical bills on the counter. Each detail tells a story of dignity preserved against mounting odds. Tell me about your life here, he says suddenly. Please, I want to understand. The request catches Marisol off guard. She looks to her mother, who nods encouragingly. Slowly, haltingly at first, she begins to speak. About endless hours at her candy stand, each sale bringing them a fraction closer to affording Carmen's surgery. About neighbors who share what little they have, who watch each other's children and tend each other's sick. About the constant mathematics of survival, choosing between medicine and repairs, between fresh ingredients and bus fare. Isabella's perfectly maintained composure cracks as Marisol describes the night she lost her savings. All that money, just gone? Everything I saved for Mommy's surgery, Marisol confirms, her voice steady despite the pain that flashes across her face. 6 months of work. But you still pulled me out, Alejandro says softly. Carmen speaks up then, her voice gentle but firm. My daughter works from love, Señor Castillo, not obligation. Like many in our community, we may lack money, but we are rich in other ways. The words seem to strike something deep in Alejandro. He stands abruptly, moving to the window. Below, children play with a worn soccer ball, their shouts of joy rising above the sounds of construction and traffic. A woman hangs laundry between buildings, the bright colors a defiant splash of beauty against gray walls. 2 men work together to repair a broken step, sharing tools and conversation with easy familiarity. Life flowed the streets like a river, persistent and vital. Alejandro watches an elderly woman struggle with heavy groceries until a teenager runs to help, refusing the coin she tries to press into his hand. The scene strikes him with the force of revelation. This is what he's been blind to, the invisible bonds that hold communities together when everything else threatens to tear them apart. Turning back to the room, Alejandro's face shows the impact of his epiphany. Gone is the polished businessman who measures worth in profit margins. In his place stands a man beginning to understand the true cost and value of human connection. Inside, the atmosphere has shifted. Carmen serves coffee in mismatched cups, the rich aroma filling the small space. Isabella accepts hers with murmured thanks, her earlier skepticism softening as she watches her father's transformation. I want to help, Alejandro says finally, his voice thick with emotion. Not just with repaying your lost savings or funding the surgery, though I insist on doing both. This community, it deserves more than survival. It deserves to thrive. He outlines his initial ideas: repairs to the market, support for small businesses, maybe even a program to help others like Carmen access proper medical care. With each suggestion, his enthusiasm grows if years of accumulated guilt are transforming into purpose. Marisol listens silently, her coffee cooling untouched. The help he offers would change everything, not just for her family, but for everyone she loves. Yet something holds her back, a lifetime of learning that nothing comes without cost. After they leave, Carmen reaches for Marisol's hand across the table. Mia, not every opportunity comes with chains attached. Sometimes help is just help. How can I trust him? Marisol asks, voicing her deepest fear. Men like him, they don't see us as people. We're just numbers on a spreadsheet, problems to be solved. He sees you now, Carmen says simply. You showed him our humanity when you saved his life. Maybe it's time to show him our trust. That night, Marisol sits at her window, this night, watching the stars emerge above the city lights. Her journal lies open in her lap, A single line written across the page: hope is a risk worth taking. The words feel like a prayer or maybe a promise. Tomorrow will bring what it brings, but tonight, in this moment, Marisol allows herself to believe that sometimes change comes not in floods that destroy, but in gentle rains that nourish new growth. She thinks of Alejandro's face as he watched the neighborhood from her window and seeing not problems but possibilities. Maybe trust, like hope, is something you have to choose again and again, even when experience warns against it. Maybe that's what courage really means. Not the dramatic rescue in a storm, but the quiet decision to keep believing in better things. The night deepens around her, but Marisol stays at her window, watching her world through new eyes. Somewhere in the distance, music plays. Someone's radio carrying notes of hope into the darkness. She recognizes the song, Sabora Me, the same one that often drifts through the market. Its familiar melody wraps around her like a blessing, a reminder that some things remain constant even as others change. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new decisions to make. But for now, Marisol lets herself rest in this moment of possibility, where hope feels less like a risk and more like coming home. Dawn creeps over the market square, painting the worn buildings in shades of amber and rose. Marisol Rivera's fingers trace the rough grain of her newly repaired candy stand, the wood still bearing scars from the New Year's Eve storm. Around her, vendors gather in hushed clusters, their voices a mix of hope and skepticism as they await Alejandro Castillo's announcement. Elena appears at Marisol's elbow, silver bangles clinking softly. "You knew about this meeting, no?" Her dark eyes search Marisol's face. "Everyone's saying Alejandro consulted you first. I heard the same rumors as everyone else." Marisol straightens a jar of crystallized ginger, more for something to do with her hands than any real need. The morning sun catches the sugar crystals, scattering tiny rainbows across her work surface. The crowd parts as Alejandro Castillo approaches the makeshift stage, really just a platform of wooden pallets raised above the market's uneven cobblestones. His suit is perfectly tailored, but something about his stance has changed since the accident. He stands less rigid, more aware of the space he occupies among these people whose lives are so different from his own. "Buenos dias," Alejandro begins, his voice carrying across the square. "I've asked you here today because I believe in the power of new beginnings." Marisol watches the faces around her. Don Pablo leans on his cane, weathered features thoughtful. Rosa from the tamale stand crosses her arms, lips pressed into a thin line. Every vendor here has heard promises before, has watched outsiders sweep in with grand plans that never materialize. Tomorrow, on New Year's Day, we will host a celebration unlike any this market has seen, Alejandro continues. But this isn't just about one day of festivities. This event marks the beginning of real change. Grants for small businesses, funds for repairs, resources to help this community thrive. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Marisol feels it like a physical wave, hope warring with decades of learned caution. Her own heart beats faster despite her efforts to remain neutral. "I know many of you have doubts." Alejandro's gaze sweeps the gathering, lingering briefly on Marisol. "And you're right to question the motives of someone like me, but sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to see what truly matters. I owe my life to this community, to one person in particular, whose selfless actions showed me the meaning of real courage." Heat creeps up Marisol's neck as heads turn in her direction. She fights the urge to step behind her display stand, to hide from the weight of their stares. Some faces show warmth, others calculation. A few hold something darker, resentment, perhaps, or suspicion. "Marisol Rivera didn't just save my life during the storm," Alejandro says. "She showed me what this community is capable of. Now I'm asking for her help again, and yours, to build something lasting, something that honors the spirit of unity and resilience I've witnessed here." The silence that follows feels electric, charged with possibility and doubt in equal measure. Marisol's fingers find the cross at her throat, warming the metal with her touch as she waits for the crowd's reaction. The first response comes from Don Pablo's son-in-law, his voice cutting through the tension. "And how much will this celebration cost us?" "Nothing." Alejandro spreads his hands. "I'm covering all expenses. Every peso spent will go back into this community." Another voice calls out, "What's the catch?" "No catch. Alejandro's smile holds a hint of sadness. Just a man trying to repay a debt that can never truly be repaid. The crowd shifts, whispers threading through the morning air. Marisol watches a group of older vendors exchange knowing looks. They've weathered too many broken promises to trust easily. But there's something different in Alejandro's stance, a humility that wasn't there before the accident. Elena leans close to Marisol's ear. What do you think, Mija? Is he sincere? Before Marisol can answer, Alejandro steps down from the platform and makes his way through the crowd. He stops at her stand, and suddenly all eyes are on them both. Señorita Rivera, he says, his voice carrying just far enough for nearby vendors to hear. Would you consider joining our planning committee? Your insight would be invaluable. The words catch in Marisol's throat. Part of her wants to refuse. She has her own stand to run, her mother to care for. But Carmen's voice echoes in her memory from their conversation last night. Sometimes, Mija, trust must be rebuilt one small step at a time. I'll help, Marisol says finally, but I have conditions. A ripple of surprise runs through the onlookers. Few people dare to set terms with Alejandro Castillo. Name them, he says. Local vendors get priority for supplying the event, and we need to ensure everyone benefits, not just those with the biggest stands or best locations. Alejandro nods, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Agreed. We'll start this afternoon. The next few days pass in a blur of activity. Marisol splits her time between her candy stand and helping coordinate event preparations. Her muscles ache from hanging strings of papel picado across the market square, but there's satisfaction in watching the space transform. Bright tissue paper flags flutter in the breeze, their delicate designs casting shifting shadows on the cobblestones. She works alongside her neighbors, noting how their initial reluctance begins to soften. Elena brings her tamales during planning meetings. Don Pablo offers suggestions for arranging the music stages. Even Rosa, who rarely speaks to anyone, contributes ideas for organizing the food vendors. Like old times, Elena says one evening as they fold paper flowers for decorations. Remember when the whole market would come together for festivals? Marisol nods, carefully creasing a petal. Before the hard times came, before we forgot how to trust each other. Elena's fingers still on her flower. Marisol, I'm sorry I doubted you. After the accident, when Isabella was making accusations. It's forgotten. Marisol means it, mostly. The pain of those days still lingers, but it's dulled by the warmth of working together again, of seeing hope return to tired faces. The morning of the event arrives crisp and clear. Marisol adjusts a jar of candied pecans on her newly painted display, the wood smooth under her fingertips. Around her, the market hums with energy. Children practice traditional dances in an empty corner, their shoes tapping against the stones. The smell of cooking food mingles with the sweetness from her stand. Tamales steaming, churros frying, coffee brewing. Isabella Castillo's voice cuts through the pleasant atmosphere like a knife. I need to speak with you. She stands rigid beside Marisol's stand, her expensive perfume sharp in the morning air. Now. Marisol follows Isabella to the edge of the square, where other committee members gather for a final meeting. The group falls silent as they approach. I've held my tongue long enough, Isabella begins, her words precise and cutting, but I can't stand by and watch you manipulate my father like this. The accusation hits Marisol like a physical blow. What? Don't play innocent. Isabella's eyes flash. First the convenient rescue, then positioning yourself as some kind of community leader. You saw an opportunity with my father and took it. Heat rises in Marisol's cheeks. Around them, committee members shift uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. The trust she's worked so hard to rebuild feels as fragile as tissue paper in a storm. That's not true, Marisol manages, but her voice sounds weak, even to her own ears. Isn't it? Isabella steps closer. You lost your savings in the flood. How convenient that my father now funds your little projects. Tell me, what's your real angle here? The words echo across the square. Vendors pause in their preparations, heads turning toward the confrontation. Marisol sees the doubt creeping back into their expressions, the whispers starting again. She walks home alone that evening, her steps heavy on the familiar streets. The laundromat below their apartment thrums with its usual rhythm. But even that comforting sound can't ease the ache in her chest. Carmen looks up from her mending as Marisol enters. Mija, what's wrong? The tears come then, hot and unwanted. Marisol sinks into a kitchen chair, the wood creaking beneath her. Everything I do makes it worse. Maybe Isabella's right. Maybe I should step away from the whole thing. No. Carmen sets aside her sewing. You listen to me, Marisol Rivera. Your father didn't raise a coward, and I didn't raise someone who gives up when others question her heart. Marisol pulls her journal from her bag, its pages worn soft with use. Inside, she's recorded every step of this journey, her fears, her hopes, the small victories and crushing setbacks. The words blur through her tears. What do I do, Mommy? You show them who you are. Carmen's voice grows stronger, not with arguments or excuses, with actions like you always have. The next morning dawns bright and cold. The market square fills quickly, people drawn by the smell of food and the promise of celebration. Alejandro takes the stage as planned, his presence commanding attention. Friends, he begins, neighbors. Today marks more than just the start of a new year. It marks the beginning of real change in our community. His eyes find Marisol in the crowd. Some of you may wonder why I chose to invest here. The answer is simple, because someone showed me what real wealth looks like, not in money or property, but in the strength of people who look out for each other, who sacrifice for their neighbors without asking for reward. A murmur runs through the crowd. Alejandro continues, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. Marisol Rivera didn't just save my life during that storm. She lost everything she had saved, money for her mother's surgery, because she chose to help a stranger. That's the spirit that makes this community special. That's what we're celebrating today. Isabella stands at the edge of the stage, her expression unreadable. Marisol feels the weight of stares again, but this time she doesn't shrink from them. Taking a deep breath, she steps forward. The path to the stage feels longer than it should, each step carrying the weight of months of doubt and struggle. When she reaches the microphone, her hands shake slightly, but her voice comes out clear. I know some of you have questioned my motives, she begins. That's fair. Times are hard, and it's easier to suspect than to trust. But I want to tell you what I see when I look at this market. She describes the vendors who extend credit to struggling families, the children who help elderly neighbors carry their groceries, the small kindnesses that weave their community together. This isn't about me or Mr. Castillo or anyone else. It's about remembering who we are. People who help each other, even when it costs us something, even when others doubt us. The silence that follows her words feels different from before, thoughtful rather than suspicious. Elena is the first to move, crossing to stand beside Marisol. Don Pablo follows, then others, until a small crowd gathers around her. We've been foolish, Elena says quietly, letting fear make us forget what matters. Isabella steps forward then, her usual confidence replaced by something more uncertain. I may have judged too quickly, she says. I'm sorry, Marisol. The apology hangs in the air between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Marisol thinks of her father's words about forgiveness being a choice we make every day. Thank you, she says simply. The celebration begins in earnest then. Music filling the square, children dancing, the smell of food and the sound of laughter rising into the winter air. Marisol returns to her stand where a line has formed for her candies. As she serves her neighbors, she notices small changes. People meet her eyes again, offer genuine smiles. A child brings her a paper flower, carefully folded. Don Pablo stops to share a story about her father from years ago. The trust isn't fully rebuilt. That will take time. But as the sun sets on the first day of the new year, Marisol feels something shift inside her. She thinks of her journal waiting at home, ready for today's entry. For the first time in months, she knows exactly what she'll write. Today, we remembered how to hope. The sun hasn't risen yet when Marisol opens her journal, its worn pages spread across the dining table like fallen leaves. Her pen hovers over blank paper as she listens to the gentle whir of the space heater, its orange coil casting shadows on the wall. The market reopens today, after the holiday break, and her stomach twists at the thought of facing everyone after Isabella's public accusation. Mia. Carmen's voice drifts from her bedroom doorway. She stands there in her faded robe, one hand pressed against the frame for support. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Marisol's pen scratches against paper. Will they ever trust me again? Carmen's slippers whisper across the floor as she approaches. She rests her hand on Marisol's shoulder, her touch light but steady. Your father used to say that trust, like candy, starts with the smallest grain of sugar. The rest is patience and faith. Papa never had the whole market turn against him. No. Carmen eases into the chair beside her daughter. But he faced plenty of people who thought a candy maker couldn't provide for his family, who said we were foolish to chase dreams instead of security. She taps the journal. Yet here you are, carrying on his legacy. Marisol traces her finger over her father's recipe for dulce de leche, written in his careful script along the margin. I'm not sure I'm strong enough, mommy. Strength isn't about never doubting. Carmen catches Marisol's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. It's about moving forward anyway. You saved a man's life without thinking of reward. That's who you are, mija, someone who acts from love, even when it costs you everything. A knock at the door startles them both. Marisol checks her watch, barely 6 a.m. Through the peephole, she sees Alejandro Castillo juggling several boxes, his expensive coat dusted with early morning frost. Let me help with those. Marisol opens the door, reaching for the topmost box. Inside, she glimpses streamers and strings of lights. Just the person I was hoping to see. Alejandro's smile carries none of his daughter's earlier suspicion. I wanted to get an early start on the decorations, though I confess I may have overdone it at the party supply store. Marisol peers into another box filled with paper flowers and metallic balloons. This is a lot. Too much? His enthusiasm falters. I'm not always good at gauging these things. Isabella says I tend to either do too much or too little, never quite hitting the right balance. No, it's perfect. Marisol surprises herself by meaning it. The children will love the balloons. And Elena, she runs the textile stand. She can help arrange the flowers. She has an eye for these things. Alejandro's shoulders relax. I'm grateful for your guidance. This community, I want to do right by it. By all of you. He hesitates. I know there's been tension, especially with Isabella, but I hope you'll let me prove that my intentions are sincere. Marisol studies him, this wealthy man standing in her modest hallway, surrounded by party supplies like a kid planning his first fiesta. The contrast should be comical, but instead, she finds it oddly touching. The market opens in an hour. We should get started. The walk to the market feels longer than usual, their footsteps echoing off frost-covered sidewalks. Alejandro fills the silence with plans and ideas, his enthusiasm gaining momentum with each block. I was thinking we could set up a central area for the musicians, he says, gesturing with his free hand. And maybe arrange the food vendors in a circle around it so people can browse while they listen. What do you think? Before Marisol can answer, a familiar voice calls out. Marisol! Espera! Elena Morales hurries toward them, her silver bangles jingling with each step. She eyes Alejandro's boxes with curiosity, but addresses Marisol first. I wanted to catch you before everyone else arrived, about what happened yesterday. Marisol's chest tightens, but Elena continues. My Anna couldn't sleep last night. She kept asking why people were being mean to her favorite candy maker. She made this for you. She pulls out a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures, one small, one tall, surrounded by what looks like colorful clouds. She says they're cotton candy clouds because you make the sweetest things in life. Something warm and unexpected blooms in Marisol's chest. She takes the drawing carefully, as if it might dissolve like sugar in rain. Tell her the clouds are perfect. Elena squeezes her arm. We know who you are, Marisol. The rest will remember too. She turns to Alejandro. Now, what's in these mysterious boxes? The market slowly comes alive around them as they work. Don Pablo arrives with his granddaughter, both immediately pitching in to hang streamers. Other vendors drift in, some hesitant at first, but drawn in by the growing atmosphere of celebration. Marisol moves between groups, directing traffic and solving small crises. She catches fragments of conversation, whispered opinions about Alejandro's presence, speculation about Isabella's accusations. But increasingly, she hears other things too. Appreciation for the decorations, excitement about the event, memories of past celebrations. Near the entrance, Rosa from the tamale stand struggles with a string of lights. Without thinking, Marisol steps in to help, their hands working in familiar tandem until the lights hang just right. Gracias, Rosa says softly. Then, after a pause, my Jose still talks about how you gave him free candy when he did well on his math test. said it made him feel like a king. It was just a piece of tamarind candy. It was kindness. Rosa meets her eyes. Some people forget that's worth more than gold. The morning rushes by in a blur of preparation. Marisol barely notices the growing crowd until she steps back to check the position of a banner and finds herself surrounded by neighbors and families dressed in their holiday best. Children dart between stands, their shoes leaving scuff marks on the freshly swept concrete. The air fills with the mingled scents of cooking food and the sound of laughter. She retreats to the edge of the market, needing a moment to steady herself. The transformation is stunning. Paper flowers bloom overhead, lights twine between posts, and music spills from the central plaza where the mariachi band tunes their instruments. In one corner, she spots Alejandro deep in conversation with a group of elderly vendors, his gestures animated as he listens to their stories. A movement catches her eye. Isabella Castillo, threading her way through the crowd in a dress that probably costs more than Marisol's monthly rent. She pauses near Carmen's wheelchair, seemingly lost in thought as she watches Marisol's mother chat with her neighbors. Your father tells me it was my mother's tamales that finally convinced him to stay that night, Carmen says to someone Marisol can't see. Said he hadn't tasted anything that reminded him so much of home since his own mother passed. I didn't know that. Isabella's voice carries clearly despite the crowd. He never talks about his mother. Loss makes some memories precious, others painful, but your father, he recognized something in those tamales. The love that goes into making something by hand, the way food can bridge any distance. Carmen's voice softens. Just like my Marisol with her candies, every piece she makes carries a piece of her heart. Isabella's expression shifts, something complicated passing across her features. She glances toward the stage where the mariachi band has begun to play, then back to Carmen. After a long moment, she straightens her shoulders and walks purposefully toward the microphone. The music fades as Isabella takes the stage. Conversations quiet, attention turning toward this unexpected development. Marisol's heart pounds against her ribs as Isabella adjusts the microphone, her hands trembling slightly despite her composed expression. I owe someone an apology, Isabella begins, her voice carrying across the hushed market. When I first came here, I saw what I expected to see. A community I didn't understand. People I was quick to judge. I looked at Marisol Rivera and saw only what my prejudices allowed me to see. She pauses, searching the crowd until she finds Marisol. I was wrong. Marisol saved my father's life without hesitation, losing her own savings in the process. But it's more than that. Every day she pours her heart into making this community sweeter, kinder, more beautiful. While I was busy suspecting her motives, she was showing us all what real strength looks like. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Marisol feels dozens of eyes turned toward her, but her feet seem rooted to the spot. Isabella continues, her voice growing stronger. I'm sorry, Marisol. Sorry for doubting you, for letting fear and ignorance cloud my judgment. You've taught me that true character isn't about what we have, but what we're willing to give. Thank you for that lesson. I hope you'll let me try to be worthy of it. The silence that follows feels electric. Marisol's throat tightens as she makes her way to the stage, each step carrying the weight of months of struggle and hope. When she reaches the microphone, Isabella steps back, offering a tentative smile. Thank you, Marisol says simply, her voice rough with emotion. She turns to face her community, faces she's known since childhood, others newer, but no less precious. When I was little, my father used to say that candy making is like life, sometimes sweet, sometimes bitter, but always better when shared. She draws a deep breath. These past months have been hard. I've lost things I thought I couldn't live without. But I've gained something too, a reminder that we are strongest when we stand together. Every kind word, every small gesture of support, they've been like sugar crystals building into something beautiful. The crowd stirs, heads nodding, hands reaching for neighbors. Marisol continues, her voice growing stronger. This market isn't just a place to buy and sell. It's where we share our stories, our dreams, our lives. Whatever changes come, that won't change. We'll face them together, making something sweeter than any one of us could make alone. Applause erupts, starting slow, then building like a wave. Someone, she thinks it's Don Pablo, shouts, Viva Marisol, and others take up the cry. Before she knows it, she's surrounded people offering hugs, tears, and small gifts. A tamale from Rosa, a silver bracelet from Elena, drawings from children. Through it all, she catches glimpses of other moments. Alejandro wiping his eyes discreetly, Isabella hugging Carmen, vendors who'd been suspicious yesterday now offering their wares with warm smiles. The market thrums with energy, with hope, with the possibility of something new being born from the ashes of doubt. Days blur into weeks as winter softens toward spring. Carmen's surgery, funded by Alejandro's generosity, goes better than anyone dared hope. Marisol splits her time between caring for her mother and managing her expanding business. No longer just a stand, but a proper shop with gleaming display cases and a small kitchen in the back. She's arranging a new batch of coconut candies when Isabella appears in the doorway, carrying a folder thick with papers. Have a minute? I've been working on some ideas for that small business grant program we discussed. Come in. Marisol wipes her hands on her apron. Just let me finish this batch. Isabella settles at the small table by the window, spreading out documents with practiced efficiency, but her eyes keep straying to Marisol's hands as they shape and wrap each piece of candy. I used to think luxury meant expensive things, Isabella says suddenly. Designer clothes, fancy restaurants. But watching you work, there's more artistry in how you wrap those candies than in any five-star dessert I've ever had. Marisol pauses, a half-wrapped candy in her hands. It's not about the wrapping. It's about the care that making something special for someone else. That's what I'm trying to learn. Isabella taps the papers in front of her. How to make something that matters, something that helps people grow. Together, they bend over the grant proposals, adding notes and suggestions. Outside, the market bustles with its familiar rhythm, vendors calling out prices, children laughing, music drifting from someone's radio. But there's something new, too. Construction sounds from where Alejandro's crews are repairing the old buildings, the excited chatter of business owners discussing expansion plans. Later that evening, Alejandro walks alone through the transformed market. String lights twinkle overhead, casting warm pools of light on freshly painted walls and restored storefronts. He pauses at Marisol's shop, now closed for the day but still fragrant with the ghost of sugar and spice. Different view than when you first came here, eh? Don Pablo appears beside him, leaning on his cane, in more ways than one. Alejandro touches the wall, feeling the smooth new paint under his fingers. I thought I was coming to change this place. Instead, it changed me. Don Pablo nods sagely. That's the magic of community, my friend. Like Marisol's candies, the real sweetness is in the sharing. The year ends as it began, with the market full of celebration. But this time, there's no storm threatening the horizon. Marisol sits with her mother at a table near her shop, watching fireworks paint the sky in bursts of color. Carmen's hand is warm in hers, stronger now after months of recovery. Around them, their community celebrates. Elena's daughter shows off her new quinceañera dress, twirling under the lights. Rosa's tamales sell out early, but she saves two for Marisol and Carmen. Isabella and Alejandro move through the crowd, no longer outsiders, but part of the fabric of this place. Marisol's journal lies open on her lap, its pages filled with new dreams and possibilities. But for now, she simply watches the fireworks, feeling the weight of her father's cross against her throat and the warmth of her mother's hand in hers. Above them, stars peek through gaps in the firework smoke, ancient and constant as hope itself. A breeze carries the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant sound of someone singing. Marisol closes her eyes, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for her mother's health, for her community's trust, for the chance to keep making life a little sweeter, one small kindness at a time. The fireworks fade, leaving only starlight and the warm glow of string lights. But in that gentle darkness, Marisol feels the promise of dawn, not just for herself, but for all of them. Together, they've built something stronger than steel and sweeter than any candy, a future worth believing in. Thank you so much for watching and listening to our story. Your time and support mean the world to us. If this video resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Your engagement helps us grow and continue sharing meaningful stories. See you in the next video.